For 30 years, Keanu Reeves carried a name he never dared to speak until today. Behind his kindness was a love so deep, it haunted every role he played. Now, as one interview threatens to expose everything, Keanu must choose: protect his silence or confess the truth that could change two lives forever. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The rain hadn't started yet, but the sky outside Keanu Reeves's home in the Hollywood Hills had turned a deep, brooding gray. Heavy clouds stretched across the horizon like a wound refusing to heal. In the distance, the first low growl of thunder rolled over the hills, subtle but inevitable. Inside, everything was still. The house was silent, save for the slow, steady ticking of an antique wall clock in the hallway. Its sound too gentle to compete with the thoughts racing through Keanu's mind. He sat alone in his study, a small, book-lined room tucked away at the back of the house where no one else ever entered. No publicist, no assistant, not even his closest friends. The desk in front of him was bare, except for a single locked drawer he hadn't opened in years. But now, after nearly 3 decades of silence, he reached for the key. His fingers paused just above the lock. He took a slow breath and turned it. The drawer opened with a soft metallic click. Inside was only one item: a photograph. Old, worn around the edges, the color beginning to fade with time, but the image, sharp, unrelenting, seemed to glow under the dim light of the overhead lamp. In it, a woman with soft brown hair was caught mid-laugh, her eyes crinkling in joy, her head tilted back just slightly. She wasn't posing. She didn't know the photo was being taken, and that made it all the more painful. Keanu stared at the image, motionless. His thumb brushed the edge of the photo, as if afraid too much pressure would damage the memory it held. He whispered to the still air, his voice barely audible. "I've always told the truth, except about you." The storm outside cracked again, this time louder, closer. The first raindrops began to patter against the windowpane like a soft warning. Keanu didn't move. His eyes were locked on her face. 1,000 memories swirled behind that image, some beautiful, some unbearable. He could almost hear her voice, the way she used to call his name with that teasing grin, the way she brushed his shoulder in passing like it meant nothing, the way it meant everything. Her name was the one truth he had never allowed himself to speak out loud. Not in interviews, not to friends, not even in his journals. Because once you say a name like that, once you give it air, it can't be unsaid, and he had spent 30 years trying not to unravel everything he built, but now it was unraveling anyway. Just then, the soft chime of his phone echoed through the room. He blinked, as if waking from a trance. The screen lit up with a notification. One email. Subject line: "Request for interview. CNN International. From Vanessa Klein, Senior Global Correspondent." Beneath it, only one sentence previewed: "We'd like to speak with you about the love you never named." Keanu froze. His breath caught in his throat. A chill passed through him that had nothing to do with the weather. Something told him she knew. Or someone else did. And this time, hiding might not be an option. Keanu stared at the glowing screen for a long moment, the words swimming in his vision: "The love you never named." The phrasing wasn't accidental. Vanessa Klein was no ordinary journalist. She had made a career out of precision and provocation, exposing the carefully guarded truths of the world's most private icons. She didn't ask questions she didn't already know the answers to, and she didn't send emails like this unless she had evidence, which meant she had something. Maybe a photograph, maybe a quote taken out of context, or maybe worse, someone had talked, someone from the past, from that time. Keanu set the phone down slowly, almost reverently, as if placing it on a shrine. His eyes drifted back to the drawer. The photo lay there like a wound reopened, still beautiful, still dangerous. He picked it up, held it between his fingers, and for the first time in years, allowed himself to whisper her name: Sandra. The word hung in the air like smoke, curling toward the ceiling, refusing to fade. He could feel something shift inside him the moment he said it. 30 years of silence cracked slightly at the edges. Outside, the storm gathered strength. A curtain of rain now blurred the view through the tall windows, as if nature itself were trying to hide the world from him, or perhaps protect it from what he was about to do. He rose from the chair slowly, his body moving like it remembered pain. At 59, he was still strong, still fit, but there were certain wounds that lived in the bones, ones that never healed, ones shaped like regret. He walked over to the window, holding the photo in both hands. For a moment, he simply watched the rain fall, the kind of rain that washed away disguises, that peeled back illusions, that whispered the truth if you were brave enough to listen. He wasn't ready to talk to CNN, not yet, but he knew what this meant. The walls were closing in. The truth, the one he had protected for so long, was coming for him. Maybe it was time. He remembered the night he first realized he loved her. They'd been filming late, exhausted, laughing, jackets wrapped around their shoulders as they sat on the curb behind the soundstage. She had told a story about her brother, something funny, something ordinary. But it was the way she told it with so much light, so much life, that something clicked in his heart and never clicked out. He never told her. He never told anyone, because even then, he believed some truths were too fragile to survive the weight of reality. But now, as he watched the rain pour down like a baptism, a part of him wondered if that belief had been nothing more than fear in disguise, and fear had cost him everything. The rain grew louder as Keanu stepped away from the window. A single bolt of lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the edges of the dark room for just a second. He stood there, still holding the photograph, as if waiting for something, some kind of permission from the universe. But no answer came, only silence. Only the sound of rain pressing against glass-like fingers begging to be let in. He moved back to the desk and picked up the phone again. The email still glowed. Vanessa Klein, the love you never named. There was no doubt anymore. She was going to ask about Sandra. And if he didn't answer, the world might come to its own conclusions. Half-truths, speculation, more years of questions whispered in corners. And Sandra, she would see it all. Again, without warning, without context, without closure. Keanu sat back down in the chair, gripping the photograph with both hands. Her smile looked frozen in time, unchanged, untouched by all the years in between. That smile had kept him sane more times than he could count. Through grief, through fame, through the hollow stretches of loneliness that followed him like a shadow. He ran a thumb across her image, tracing her features like Braille only he could understand. "I should have told you," he said softly. Back then, on the beach, after the wrap party, he remembered it vividly. How the air smelled like salt and night. How her hand had brushed against his, lingering just long enough to make them both stop breathing. How she had looked at him and said, "I don't want to lose what we have." And how he, terrified, uncertain, proud, had nodded like a fool and said, "Neither do I." Then he walked away and never turned back. He hadn't spoken those words aloud in decades, but now, here in this quiet room, they rang louder than thunder, a truth that refused to stay buried. He placed the photo gently back in the drawer. Then he closed it, locked it again, but this time, not to forget, this time to protect it until he was ready to speak it fully. He turned off the phone screen and pushed the chair back slowly. The room felt different now, less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room for a reckoning. He stepped toward the front door and opened it. The storm greeted him without hesitation. Rain spilled across the porch, soaking his bare arms within seconds, but he didn't flinch. He stepped forward past the threshold, letting the rain hit his skin like a wake-up call. Like penance, a slow breath left his chest as he looked up at the sky. Maybe it was time to stop running. Time to stop hiding. Some truths don't just set you free, they rewrite everything. The phone rang just after 9 p.m. The rain had eased to a steady whisper outside, But the tension inside Keanu's home hadn't budged. He was sitting at the edge of his bed, still damp from the storm, a towel wrapped around his shoulders. When the screen lit up and he saw Marcus's name, he already knew what the call would be about. He answered without a word. Marcus's voice came through sharp, fast, a little too breathless for a man who had seen Hollywood at its most chaotic. "Keanu, we've got a problem." Keanu didn't respond immediately. He waited. Marcus continued. "CNN Europe, Vanessa Klein. Her team reached out about an interview. They say it's for a legacy profile. You know, awards, philanthropy, impact. But that's not what this island." Keanu closed his eyes. "What is it?" Marcus hesitated. "They found something. Rare behind-the-scenes footage from the lake house. Maybe Speed 2? Candid stuff. Unreleased. I don't know how. But they've got it. And her producer let something slip. They're going to ask about the beach night." Keanu opened his eyes. The words didn't shock him. They just confirmed what he already felt in his bones. He stood up, walked to the corner of the room where the flat screen hung on the wall, and turned it on. The opening scene of the lake house was already queued up on his Blu-ray player. The disc had been in there for years, untouched, as if waiting for the moment when he couldn't avoid it anymore. The image flickered to life: snow falling around a lonely lake house, footsteps crunching in the snow. Then came her voice, that unmistakable softness, the one that still lived somewhere behind his ribs. Marcus's voice returned, still anxious. "Keanu, do you understand what this means? Vanessa doesn't bluff. If she's involved, they have a plan. They're not just looking to make headlines. They're going to hit where it hurts." Keanu turned the volume up slightly. On screen, he was standing with her by the frozen lake. That scene, the one where they almost kissed. The one they both admitted later had taken more than one take because the emotion was too real, too raw. The cameras kept catching what wasn't in the script. Keanu didn't answer Marcus right away. He reached forward, pausing the scene at the exact frame he remembered. Her face turned up to his, their eyes locked, the distance between them, a breath and a lie. He pressed his fingers to the screen, then finally said, low and clear, "Tell her I'll speak, but only live." There was a long pause on the other end. "Keanu, are you serious? A live interview with Vanessa Klein? That's not a safe play. You know how she works. No edits, no PR protection. Once this gets out, you can't take it back." Keanu didn't waver. "It's already been storming inside me for 30 years. On the other end of the call, Marcus exhaled slowly, but the tension didn't ease. "You understand, this won't stay quiet, right?" The crowed. "The second Vanessa's team confirms you're doing it, every outlet in the country will start speculating. People will dig into the past. Headlines, podcasts, interviews you did in 94, 97, even that Charlie Rose clip where you dodged the question about her. All of it will be back on the table." Keanu walked to the window, watching the branches sway in the wind. The streets below washed slick by the rain. The city felt distant, like a painting behind glass. "Let them talk," he said. Marcus pressed on. "I've kept your secrets longer than anyone. I know what this could cost, and I'm telling you, once this airs, there's no undoing it. You won't be able to just walk this back like a rumor. This is the one you buried, Keanu. This is her." That last word carried weight. It didn't need a name. Keanu's silence confirmed it. "She was the one," Marcus said softly. "Wasn't she?" Keanu didn't speak for a moment. Then finally he whispered, "She's still Island." The line went quiet. Marcus, for once, had nothing else to say. Keanu ended the call and lowered the phone, placing it on the windowsill. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, older, quieter, weathered by years that no camera ever captured. The face the world knew was a mask of humility, generosity, gentleness. But underneath all of that was a man who had made one decision, one that haunted every room he walked into since. He turned away from the window and crossed the room, stopping in front of a tall shelf tucked in the corner. On the middle level sat an old DVD case, The Lake House. He slid it out, opened the case slowly, and took out the disc. A small envelope rested behind it, unlabeled, worn. Inside was a single Polaroid, taken by a crew member, hers sitting on a prop bench, looking up at him, sunlight caught in her hair. That day, he remembered it. She had laughed at something he said just before the photo was taken. He couldn't remember the joke, but he remembered the way it felt, how the laughter rose in her like a wave. Free, easy, unguarded. She had that rare ability to make every moment feel like it mattered. He looked down at the image, then slipped it back into the envelope. He placed the DVD in the player and hit play. The screen lit up again. Scene after scene unfolded. Her voice, his eyes, their pauses, the way their characters tiptoed around each other. It wasn't acting, not entirely. There had been something under every line they spoke, something left unsaid. And the audience never even knew it. But he did, and so did she. The film played on as Keanu sank into the couch, his eyes fixed on the screen. The scene was subtle, a quiet dinner in the movie. A moment where their hands almost touched across the table, but didn't. His character pulled away too soon. Hers lingered just a second longer. On set, they hadn't planned that beat. It just happened. The director kept it. He remembered how the crew had gone still during that take, as if everyone sensed something intimate had crossed between them. Later, when they reviewed the footage, no one said anything. No one had to. Keanu reached for the remote and rewound the scene. Watched it again. This time, he noticed the way she swallowed just before she smiled. The way her fingers curled into her palm when their eyes met. These weren't scripted choices. These were tells, real ones. And for 30 years, he had let them exist only in memory. Until now. He paused the film and sat in silence, the screen frozen on her face, half smile, full truth. There were lines he had memorized, lines he had delivered 1,000 times. But this wasn't acting. This was the one story he never had the courage to write. And Vanessa Klein was about to write it for him unless he reclaimed it first. His phone buzzed again. A second email, this time from Vanessa's assistant. Subject, confirmation of live interview, your requested terms. Keanu opened it. She agreed. Live broadcast. No pre-approved questions. 1 hour, worldwide. The date was set for Friday. That was 4 days away. Just enough time for the world to start whispering. Just enough time for Sandra to see the announcement and wonder. Or maybe, remember. He stood up and walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, then stared at the calendar pinned to the fridge. There was nothing on it. No upcoming shoots, no press tours, no commitments. He had cleared his schedule for the month without knowing why. Now he did. He returned to the living room, set the glass down, and turned the film back on. Another scene, another almost, another look between them that spoke of everything they couldn't say. His hand reached out and touched the screen again, gently, resting on her image as if to apologize for the silence, for the years, for choosing distance over possibility. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was the reckoning. He whispered to the room, not expecting an answer. Sandy, if you're watching, I hope you know this isn't for the cameras. It's for you. Outside, the rain began to fall again. This time, softer. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with everything it left behind. Keanu Reeves was no longer hiding, and the world was about to hear the truth. The woman in the photograph wasn't a mystery to those closest to Keanu. Not really. Not if they had paid attention. Not if they had noticed the way his voice softened slightly when her name came up, or how he always deflected when asked about his happiest memories on set. Her name was never spoken in interviews with weight, only in passing, as if it didn't matter, as if it had been ordinary. But nothing about Sandra Bullock was ordinary. He first met her on the set of Speed in 1993. They were both younger then, still early enough in their careers to carry that electric mix of hunger and insecurity. The studio had pushed the chemistry. It needed to feel real, but no one had to fake anything. From the moment she walked into the production meeting late, hair still wet from the rain, laughing at her own chaos, he knew she'd change everything. She had this energy that made people orbit around her. Playful, kind, sharp-witted. On that first day, she stole the director's walkie-talkie and spent 20 minutes impersonating the head of studio security. Everyone on set thought a police officer had shut them down. Keanu couldn't stop laughing. That's what he remembered most, the laughter. It wasn't forced or polished. It wasn't for the cameras. It came from a place inside her that seemed untouched by fame. They bonded quickly, shared rides to set, late-night coffee runs, inside jokes that no one else understood. She once swapped out his call sheet with one that read only, "Scene 14, Jack looks confused." When he asked what it meant, she shrugged and said, "You've already mastered the look." He had. They clicked, not as co-stars, but as people, like they had known each other before. It scared him. There was a scene midway through the shoot after an exhausting day of action sequences where their characters had a brief, quiet moment, just a pause in the chaos. Sandra's character leaned into his, resting her head against his shoulder as they stared into the distance. The director called cut, but she didn't move right away, and neither did he. A grip happened to snap a Polaroid just then, without asking, without warning. That was the photo. Unposed, candid, her head on his shoulder, his arm behind her back, protective but unassuming, and the smile on his face. It wasn't acting. It was real, pure. The kind of smile you wear when you forget the world is watching. He kept that photo in a locked drawer for 3 decades, not because he was hiding it, but because he was protecting it. Because no moment after that ever matched the way she made him feel in that one frame of stillness. And because no one, not before or since, had ever looked at him the way she did in that picture. There were nights, especially after the noise of the world died down, when Keanu would take that photograph from the drawer and just look at it. Not to relive a fantasy, but to ground himself in something that had once felt effortless. The way Sandra leaned into him in that captured second, there was no fear, no hesitation, just comfort, trust, maybe even something deeper, something neither of them dared name. Back then, they were both rising fast. Fame moved around them like a current agents, contracts, press, expectations. On paper, they were a perfect match. Fans shipped them. Directors begged them to reunite. But in the spaces between the fame, they had built something real. A friendship so delicate they were afraid to breathe on it too hard. They never talked about what was growing underneath. Not directly. Once, during a break between scenes, Sandra had thrown a grape at him across the makeup trailer. It bounced off his chest and landed in his coffee. He looked up, stunned. She just grinned and said, "You were getting too serious." It wasn't about the grape. It was always her way of pulling him back into the moment, of making life feel lighter than it was. But there was a heaviness too. After the film wrapped, there was a beach party. The whole cast and crew had gathered, a bittersweet celebration of something they all knew had been special. That night, Keanu and Sandra slipped away from the bonfire and walked along the shoreline, barefoot, quiet. Their fingers brushed once, and neither pulled away. She looked up at him and said something simple. Just, "This doesn't feel like the end, does it?" He had answered too quickly. "Number it doesn't." But then, instead of saying what his heart was screaming, he said something safer, something rehearsed. "It was the best partnership I've ever had." And she smiled. But the smile didn't reach her eyes. That was the night he should have told her. That was the night he knew he wouldn't. Hollywood didn't make space for stories like theirs. It punished real connection. Turned it into tabloids, headlines, fabricated scandals. If they had tried to date, everything would have been dissected. Producers would have asked them to play it up. Journalists would have tried to tear it down. So he convinced himself that protecting her meant staying silent. He told himself he was being noble, that their friendship was too important to risk. That one wrong move could shatter everything. But he knows better now. He wasn't protecting her. He was protecting himself from rejection, from vulnerability, from the terrifying possibility that love might not be enough to survive the industry they lived in. And in doing so, he lost her anyway. Years passed. Awards came and went. Box office records. Long nights on location. New co-stars. New scripts. And always, the same question in every interview. Why didn't you and Sandra ever date? He would smile, nod, and give the safest version of the truth. that they were great friends, that timing never aligned, that it was better left untested. He became known for his privacy, his restraint, his refusal to feed gossip. And Sandra, she matched him, step for step. In every interview, she would protected him the same way he protected her. They kept the narrative clean, loyal, platonic. But those who looked closer could see it in their body language, in the pauses, in the way her eyes softened every time his name was mentioned. Keanu once caught a late-night rerun of a talk show she'd done years ago. The host had teased her. "You and Keanu, come on, tell us the truth. Sparks, right?" She'd laughed, nodded thoughtfully, and said, "If I had to be stranded on a desert island with one person, I'd choose Keanu, every time. But that's why we're friends, because I'd probably fall in love with him." The audience cheered. The host laughed. But Keanu sat in the dark that night, hand over his mouth, knowing exactly what she meant. It wasn't just a throwaway line. It was the truth wrapped in a smile. He knew that smile. He had lived in it once, and still he said nothing. Not because he didn't feel the same, but because by then, the silence had become part of their story. A mutual understanding built from years of self-preservation. Two people who chose the long way around, thinking they had time. Now, 30 years later, as he held that old photograph, Keanu finally admitted to himself what he had known all along. He had been a coward. He had thought silence would protect what they had. He had thought distance was safer than vulnerability. But silence isn't safety. It's surrender. And distance doesn't preserve love. It just starves it slowly. The photo hadn't changed in 3 decades. But he had. The world had. And the truth, heavy, aching, undeniable, was no longer something he could carry alone. No one ever looked at him the way she did in that photo. Not in any movie. Not in any relationship. Not in any moment after. She had seen him before the world shaped him, loved him, maybe, before he knew how to love himself. And now, it was time to stop hiding behind the myth of quiet strength. It was time to give her the truth she should have had all along. He placed the photograph gently on his desk and whispered, just loud enough for the empty room to hear, "I loved you then. I love you still. I just never said it out loud." But he would. Now he would. Vanessa Klein arrived at CNN's Los Angeles bureau just after 7 a.m., 2 black coffees in one hand, a thick red folder in the other. On the front, written in bold, permanent marker, were 3 words, Speed, 1994, restricted. Her producer, Elena, was already waiting in the conference room. The lights were low, the screen ready, footage cued. Vanessa placed the coffee down without speaking and opened the folder slowly, like it was evidence in a trial. Inside were transcripts of old interviews, emails from former crew members, snapshots from forgotten rap parties, and most valuable of all, a USB drive containing several hours of raw, never-before-seen behind-the-scenes footage. Some had been provided anonymously, some purchased, some quietly slipped from archives long thought to be locked. Vanessa sat and leaned forward, her voice flat and focused. "Let's go through it again." Elena clicked play. The screen flickered, and there they were, Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, in their 20s, vibrant, laughing, unaware they were being recorded. In one clip, they're sitting on the steps of a trailer, Keanu holding 2 cups of coffee, one of which he gently hands to Sandra. She takes it, touches his hand briefly, and then rests her head on his shoulder. They say nothing, but the silence between them says everything. In another, they're in costume, waiting between takes. She throws a piece of gum at him. He ducks. She laughs. He tries to look offended. The sound operator behind the camera is chuckling. The timestamp on the video reads the 12th of July, 1994. Then a final clip rolls grainy, but clear enough. It's the last day of filming. A cake is brought out. The crew is clapping. Sandra takes a handful of frosting and smears it across Keanu's cheek. He grabs a towel, pretends to chase her, and then, unexpectedly, wipes frosting from her chin with a slow tenderness that makes even the camera operator pause. No dialogue, no direction, just instinct. Vanessa watched the screen with sharp eyes. "Rewind that last part," she said. Elena rewound 10 seconds. The frame froze on Keanu's hand, just barely touching Sandra's face. Her smile is soft. Not for the camera, not for the crew, for him. Vanessa jotted a note. Question 7. Was the cake moment scripted or something more? Elena raised her eyebrows. "Isn't that a little leading?" Vanessa didn't look up. "Everything I ask is leading. That's the point." She turned the page in the folder and scanned a handwritten quote from one of the associate producers. They were inseparable until something happened on that beach night. After that, everything changed. Vanessa circled the sentence twice, then underlined, "the beach night." Her voice was calm, but her eyes were razor sharp. "That's the pressure point. That's where I start." By noon, Vanessa had reviewed every clip, every quote, every whispered memory passed on by former crew members and background extras. The consensus was undeniable. People had seen it. People remembered. The glances that lingered longer than necessary. The smiles that didn't match the script. The way they disappeared during lunch breaks and returned with the kind of glow that couldn't be explained by lighting changes. It wasn't gossip. It was lived truth. Never spoken aloud, but always understood. One camera assistant had written in a private email. They'd sit side by side even when they didn't have scenes together. I don't think they knew how obvious they were. I remember thinking, if they don't end up together, something's wrong with the world. Vanessa highlighted that line and wrote beside it, "Insert during question 3. Do you remember who first noticed?" She closed the folder and sat back in the chair. The story wasn't just about romance. It was about restraint. About two people who could have had everything, but chose to pretend it wasn't there. And the world had bought the performance for 30 years. But now, she was about to change that. Across the country, in Austin, Texas, Sandra Bullock stood at her kitchen counter, a mug of tea in her hands, eyes locked on the television. A teaser for the upcoming interview had just aired. A 60-second segment with no audio, just silent footage of her and Keanu on set in 1994. The frosting scene, the coffee handoff, a glimpse of the beach party. Then the title card, "Live with Keanu Reeves, the truth behind the legacy." Sandra didn't move. The steam from her tea curled upward, untouched. Her assistant, Marnie, walked in, carrying her iPad. She stopped when she saw Sandra's expression. "Did you know about this?" Sandra asked, her voice soft but tight. Marnie hesitated. "We got a tip 2 days ago that Vanessa Klein was preparing something. I didn't think it would go this far. CNN isn't usually this tabloid." Sandra didn't blink. Her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. Marnie added, "It's not officially listed as a tell-all. It's being pitched as a legacy interview." Sandra stared at the screen. The footage replayed in a loop, and there it was again, Keanu, looking at her like the world had stopped turning. She whispered the words before she realized they were coming out of her mouth. "He's going to tell them." Marnie looked up, startled. "Tell them what?" Sandra turned away from the television and set the mug down. "The truth." Sandra walked slowly toward the window, the Texas sun casting soft light across the floor. Outside, her backyard was calm trees swaying gently, wind brushing the edge of her porch. But inside her chest, something had shifted. Not panic, not fear, something older, something she had tucked away long ago and left untouched, like a letter never sent. She hadn't spoken to Keanu in months, not out of anger. Life had simply gotten in the way, projects, travel, family. But now, seeing that footage on screen, knowing it had been pulled from archives without their consent, stirred something fragile awake. She remembered that night, the beach, the waves, the silence between them that had stretched too long, and how neither of them had found the courage to fill it. She whispered to herself again, not as a fear, but as a fact. "He's going to tell them." In Los Angeles, Vanessa stood in front of the studio's glass wall, watching the city stretch endlessly beneath her. She was calm, methodical. Everything had led to this moment. She had interviewed world leaders, generals, celebrities in crisis. But this story wasn't about power or scandal. It was about love. And love, she understood, was far more dangerous. She turned to Elena. Start prepping the footage for segment 3. The frosting clip goes just before I ask about the beach. I want the audience to see what they lost before they hear why. Elena nodded. What if he denies it? Vanessa didn't hesitate. He won't. He's been silent for 30 years. You don't walk into a live interview with a woman like me unless you're ready to burn down the script. She glanced at the photos still on the screen. Sandra, resting her head on Keanu's shoulder, eyes closed, smile relaxed. I want that on the screen when I say her name. Should we reach out to Sandra for a comment? Elena asked. Vanessa shook her head. She's watching. That's all that matters. Back in Austin, Sandra sat down slowly on the edge of her couch, iPad in her lap. She opened her messages, her finger hovering over a familiar name. Keanu. The thread was filled with years of short messages, birthday greetings, holiday check-ins, inside jokes, nothing romantic, nothing said aloud, but it was always there. Underneath, she typed, "Is this really happening?" She paused, then erased it. Typed again, "Be gentle." She stared at the words for a long moment, then hit delete once more. Finally, she set the iPad down and leaned back. If he was going to tell the truth, she wouldn't stop him. And if the world was about to hear it, she would hear it too. Not from his mouth, but from his heart. After 30 years of silence, the story they had buried was rising, not as a rumor, not as a scandal, but as the kind of truth that refuses to die quietly. The music from the wrap party drifted out to the sand in broken waves of laughter and applause. Someone had brought a guitar. Someone else had lit a bonfire near the edge of the production tents. The air smelled like sea salt, sweat, and celebration. It was over. Speed had wrapped. The crew danced barefoot in the sand, and champagne bottles popped like fireworks beneath the stars. Keanu stood near the edge of the chaos, holding a half-filled cup he hadn't touched in over an hour. He watched her across the crowd, Sandra in a denim jacket over her dress, her hair loose, her cheeks glowing from the firelight and laughter. She was talking to one of the costume designers, animated, hands moving with the same rhythm he knew from every scene they shot together. She looked happy. He should have left it alone. He should have said his goodbyes and slipped away like everyone expected him to. But something in him wouldn't move. And then, like fate had tapped his shoulder, she looked up and found him watching. Their eyes met across the crowd, and everything else dimmed. Her smile softened, as if to say, "Come on, let's go." Without a word, he set down the untouched cup and began walking toward her. She was already stepping out of her sandals. They left the party together without telling anyone, feet sinking into the cool sand, shoes in hand, no words, just silence and shoreline. They walked south, away from the firelight and the music, into the night's quiet edge. The ocean murmured beside them, waves lapping gently, like it had secrets to keep. Every few steps, their arms brushed. He couldn't tell if it was accidental anymore, and he didn't want to. When they were finally far enough that the voices behind them faded into wind, Sandra stopped walking and turned toward the water. Her eyes followed the waves. "It doesn't feel like it's over," she said. "No," he replied, "it doesn't." She turned to face him fully. The moonlight traced her features. And for a moment, she didn't look like a co-star. She looked like someone he'd been searching for without realizing it. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of what comes next, just of losing this." He tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She laughed softly, but it was fragile. "You and me. This, whatever this has been. The coffee runs, the late-night rehearsals, the stupid inside jokes. I've never had that with someone I worked with. And now the movie's done, and everyone goes back to real life. I don't want to pretend this wasn't real." He stepped closer, heart pounding, unsure if it was the right moment or a mistake waiting to happen. I think I'm falling. She raised a hand gently. Don't, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Not unless you mean it forever. The space between them pulsed like a live wire. Her hand was still raised, not to push him away, but to hold the moment still. Keanu looked at her, and all the rehearsed lines he had memorized for months vanished. He wasn't Jack. She wasn't Annie. This wasn't a movie anymore. It was real, maybe too real. Her eyes didn't flinch. They waited. Not for a performance, not for charm, for truth. He swallowed hard and lowered his gaze. I don't know what forever looks like, he said, honestly. But I know what this feels like, and I don't want it to end. Sandra nodded slowly. Me neither. They stood there in silence, the ocean licking at their ankles, the breeze tangling her hair. Keanu reached up and brushed a strand from her face, his fingers pausing just slightly too long against her skin. She didn't pull away. Her breath caught in her throat, and for one suspended heartbeat, they leaned in. But they didn't kiss. They couldn't. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was reverence. Maybe it was two people who already knew how rare this was and didn't want to ruin it by moving too fast, saying too much, risking too deeply. Sandra took a step back and looked toward the horizon. You know what the worst part is? She said quietly. He shook his head. If we were anyone else, if we weren't who we are, this would be so simple. I could just reach out and take your hand, and it wouldn't be news. It wouldn't be someone's headline tomorrow morning. She glanced back at him, her voice suddenly steadier. But it would still be complicated, because this, she gestured between them, this matters, and I don't want to mess it up. He understood. God, he understood. I'd rather have you as my friend for life, she said, than risk losing you after 6 months of headlines and confusion. He nodded, but it felt like his chest was caving in. Still, he managed a quiet, yeah, me too. They didn't say anything else for a while, just walked the beach in the moonlight, side by side. Close enough to feel each other's warmth, far enough to convince themselves it was still just friendship. When they returned to the edge of the party, most of the crew had gone. The fire had burned low. A few stragglers waved goodnight. Sandra leaned in and hugged him, not casually, not like castmates. It was the kind of hug that lingered, where both bodies remembered more than they were allowed to say. When she pulled away, her eyes were shining. She smiled and whispered, "Good night, Keanu." He tried to say something back, but his throat caught. She walked away barefoot, her sandals swinging in her hand, never looking back. And that was the moment he knew. He had just let the best thing in his life walk away. The next morning, the lot was quiet. Most of the crew had already cleared out. Trailers were being dismantled, equipment packed into trucks. The whirlwind that had brought them all together for months had vanished overnight, leaving only traces behind footprints in sand, torn call sheets, echoes of laughter that no longer belonged to anyone. Keanu arrived early. He hadn't slept much. He walked straight to Sandra's trailer, not with a plan, not with a grand gesture, but with a folded piece of paper in his jacket pocket. The words inside were clumsy, half-formed, honest. A note. Just a note. The only way he could find the courage to say what he hadn't the night before. He looked around. The lot was still. Her trailer door was closed. He placed the note just inside the door, tucked under the edge of the mirror where she always left her script pages. He stood there a moment longer, fingers hovering near the handle, heart racing. Then he walked away. The note read, "I couldn't risk ruining this. I'm sorry." It didn't say what he wanted it to say. Not really. It didn't say that his heart had nearly torn in two when she pulled away on the beach, that he had barely slept, replaying every word she said, wondering if he should have kissed her anyway, that he had stood outside her trailer for 20 minutes before sliding the note in, wishing he were braver. It didn't say that her laugh had become the anchor in his day, that her eyes made him forget he was famous, and that her presence had made the chaos of filming feel like home. It didn't say that he loved her, because he didn't know how to say that yet. He thought he had time, but time has a strange way of changing its mind. He never heard back. She didn't mention the note, didn't bring it up in any of their few check-ins over the months that followed. They texted occasionally, smiled at each other during red carpets, talked about collaborating again someday. But the tone had shifted. The warmth remained, the respect, the laughter, but the intimacy they'd found on that beach, the thing that shimmered just beneath their friendship, was never spoken of again. For years, he convinced himself it had been the right decision, that they had protected something precious, that silence had been an act of love. But now, decades later, staring down a live interview that threatened to bring it all into daylight, he finally saw the truth for what it was. He hadn't protected her. He had abandoned the possibility of something extraordinary because he was afraid. And that note, still folded and yellowing in her old script binder somewhere, was the last thing he ever said to her about that night. Not love, not goodbye, just fear, scribbled in ink. The studio was quiet, cooler than he expected, lit softly but not warmly, the kind of lighting designed to expose, not flatter. Keanu stepped through the double doors, alone. No publicist, no assistant, just him in a black button-down shirt, sleeves rolled once at the wrist, dark jeans, and the same scuffed boots he'd worn for a decade. There was no announcement, no one called action, but every camera turned toward him the moment he entered. He gave a polite nod to the production assistant near the monitors, then walked across the stage floor toward the main set. As he passed the crew, he paused briefly. "Hey, Daryl," he said to the lighting tech near the back. "Still keeping it honest?" Daryl grinned. "Always." Then to the camera op on his left, a younger guy with nervous hands. "First time working alive with Vanessa?" The operator nodded stiffly. Keanu offered a small smile. "Just breathe. It's not as scary as it looks." He was lying. It was scarier. He stepped onto the stage platform and looked at the chair waiting for him. Leather, wide-armed, centered under a bank of lights that felt too deliberate. It wasn't a conversation seat. It was a spotlight. Vanessa Klein entered from the opposite side, clipboard in one hand, her hair pulled back into a precise twist. She wore navy blue clean lines, sharp collar, no jewelry. Her eyes met his, but there was no warmth in them, only focus. "Thank you for being here, Keanu," she said, voice measured. He nodded once. "Thank you for having me." They Saturday. No handshake, no small talk. The air between them was tight, already stretching under the weight of what hadn't been said. A producer's voice echoed from behind the glass. "Going live in 5, 4, 3. The red light blinked on. Vanessa began. "Good evening. I'm Vanessa Klein. Tonight, in a rare live appearance, we're joined by someone who needs no introduction. Actor, producer, philanthropist, icon of humility in a city known for anything but." She turned slightly toward him. "Keanu Reeves, thank you again for agreeing to speak with us." He shifted slightly in his chair, fingers folded in his lap. "Glad to be here." Her smile was professional, not kind, not cruel, just rehearsed. "You've built a career on performance. But tonight, we're here to talk about truth." Keanu nodded. "I figured it was time." Vanessa tapped the edge of her clipboard but didn't look down at it. "Let's not waste time. The world knows you as a man of few words, so I'll ask simply." She leaned in just slightly, her tone changing. "Is it true you fell in love with Sandra Bullock while filming Speed?" The studio fell still. Keanu didn't move. His breath caught. He looked down for half a second, then raised his eyes past Vanessa, past the cameras, to somewhere far off, and whispered, "Yes." The words settled into the room like dust after an explosion. For a moment, no one breathed. Even the camera operators seemed to hesitate, as if afraid their slightest movement might break the fragile weight of what had just been said. Vanessa blinked once, then leaned forward. "You're saying, on live television, that you, Keanu Reeves, fell in love with Sandra Bullock during the filming of Speed in 1994? Keanu didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the middle distance, as though searching for the person he used to be. He swallowed, then nodded once. "I did," he said softly. "Completely." Vanessa adjusted her posture, her tone cool and clinical. "And, for 30 years, you never said a word publicly, never addressed the rumors, never clarified. Why now? Keanu turned his gaze to her slowly. There was no defensiveness in his expression, just something quiet and old, a kind of sorrow that had ripened into acceptance. Because I've spent more years regretting my silence than I ever spent enjoying my career. And maybe that sounds dramatic, but it's the truth. He paused, gathering his thoughts. His voice was steady, but it carried the weight of something that had been stored for too long. I convinced myself that staying quiet was the mature thing, that protecting our friendship was more important than chasing something uncertain. But the truth is, he exhaled. I was scared. I let fear win. Vanessa held his gaze. Were you afraid of her rejecting you? He shook his head. Number. I was afraid of not being enough. The audience watching from around the world couldn't see it, but off camera, one of the crew members quietly wiped a tear from her cheek. The confession was raw, in a way few live interviews ever were. Not sensational, not rehearsed, just honest. Vanessa pressed forward. Did she know? Keanu's eyes flickered. I don't know, he said. Maybe she did. Maybe she felt it too. There were moments, so many moments. But we never said the words. We danced around it, protected each other from something we couldn't explain. Vanessa's voice softened, but her question stayed sharp. Was there a specific moment? A turning point? He nodded. There was a night. After the rap party, we walked the beach together, just the two of us. She said she didn't want to lose what we had, and I almost told her. I almost said it. He looked down at his hands, now resting in his lap. I started to. I said, I think I'm falling, but she stopped me. Vanessa leaned in. What did she say? Keanu's voice dropped to a whisper. She said, don't say it unless you mean it forever. Vanessa sat back slowly, absorbing the weight of the words. And did you? She asked. Did you mean it forever? Keanu's jaw tensed slightly, then relaxed. He looked up, not at her, but directly into the camera. He knew Sandra could be watching, and if she was, he wanted no misunderstanding. I did, he said quietly. I still do. The silence that followed didn't beg for music or commercial breaks. It demanded stillness. It demanded presence. Even Vanessa, who had built her career on control and precision, felt the air shift. Her next question came more cautiously. Why didn't you say it? Not then, not the next day, not for 30 years. Keanu blinked slowly. Because I was raised to think love meant sacrifice, that you keep it quiet if there's a risk of hurting someone else. That real love meant protecting them even from yourself, especially from yourself. He looked down again, but I think I got that wrong. I think silence can be just as damaging as selfishness. And sometimes, not saying I love you is the most selfish thing you can do. Vanessa's voice came in softer now. There are people out there watching this who've lived with regret, who've lost the chance to say what they really felt. What do you say to them? Keanu looked directly at the lens, not blinking. I say don't wait. Don't assume you'll have more time. Don't let fear make you quiet, because the words you're most afraid to say are probably the ones they're most desperate to hear. Vanessa glanced down at her notes, then paused. She set them aside. This isn't what I expected, she admitted. I know, Keanu said. It's not what I expected either. Do you think she forgives you? He paused at that, the question hanging heavier than the others. I don't know, he said, but that's not why I'm saying this. I'm not doing this to fix anything. I'm doing it because the truth deserves to be said. She deserves to know. Vanessa leaned forward again. And now that it's out there, what happens next? Keanu smiled faintly. I guess the world catches up to what my heart's known for 30 years. The red light above the camera continued to glow, but in that moment, it didn't matter who was watching. This wasn't a performance. This wasn't a reveal engineered for ratings. It was a man finally telling the truth. A truth that had lived in a drawer, in a flip phone, in the silence of a beach night that had never truly ended. Keanu folded his hands together and closed his eyes for a brief second. Then he opened them again, and for the first time in 3 decades, he looked straight into the camera and let go of the silence that had defined his life. Vanessa Klein didn't let the silence last long. She gave Keanu only a breath to recover before she shifted in her chair and reached under the table. From a leather satchel, she pulled out a thick file. Its tab read, Bullock 1993 to 2023. The camera caught the title as she opened it. She slid 3 photographs across the table between them, each one carefully laminated. In the first, Keanu and Sandra were seated at a wrap party, close enough that their shoulders touched, their heads tilted toward each other in quiet conversation. In the second, they were caught mid-laugh during a red carpet interview, hands brushing. The third was the most damning, Sandra wiping something from Keanu's cheek during a shoot, while he looked at her with an expression that didn't belong to acting. "Let's talk about these," Vanessa said sharply. "For 30 years, you've maintained that you and Sandra Bullock were just friends. But these photos and dozens more like them tell a different story." Keanu stared down at them. "He didn't touch them," she continued. "Sources from multiple sets, including Speed and the Lake House, say you two were inseparable. One grip said, and I quote, 'They didn't need a script. They were already playing the parts.'" Keanu's jaw tensed. He didn't argue. Vanessa leaned in, voice tightening. "Tell me, Keanu, if this love was real, and it meant as much as you just claimed on live television, why didn't you ever do anything about it?" He looked at her, wounded but steady. "I was afraid." Vanessa didn't blink. Afraid of what? A headline? A breakup? Or that she might actually love you back? Keanu closed his eyes. Vanessa struck again. "You let her go. You let 30 years pass. She never married. She never had the children she spoke publicly about wanting. And you, by your own admission, kept silent. You said nothing. For decades." His fingers curled slightly on the armrest of the chair. Vanessa paused, letting her next words drop like stones. "Do you realize that to some people watching this, it might look like you stole her years?" The blow landed. Keanu visibly shook, his chest rising unevenly with breath. "I didn't mean to," he whispered. Vanessa folded her hands in front of her. "But you did, didn't you?" He nodded once. "I think I did." Vanessa opened another part of the file, this one filled with printed interview quotes. She read one aloud, dated 2009. A question from a late-night show host to Sandra. "Why are you still single?" Her reply, "Because I haven't met the one who makes it all feel worth the risk." Vanessa dropped the quote like a knife. "Was that about you, Keanu?" He looked away, unable to answer. Keanu's shoulders slumped slightly under the weight of the question. The bright studio lights caught the faint tremor in his hands. He didn't try to deflect. He didn't try to spin it. He just stared at the floor for a long moment, as if trying to summon the courage to finally face what he had buried. Vanessa didn't wait for a response. She reached into the side pocket of her satchel and pulled out something unexpected, an old Motorola flip phone. Its casing was worn, the black plastic dulled by time and use. She placed it between them on the table. "Recognize this?" she asked, almost casually. Keanu's eyes widened. He reached out slowly and picked it up with both hands, as if it were fragile. It was his. He didn't ask how she got it. He didn't need to. He had brought it with him always, kept it powered on, tucked into a drawer at night, slipped into a coat pocket when he traveled. It had only one contact saved in it, one name that never changed, one number that stayed the same. He opened the phone slowly. The camera zoomed in. On the screen, Sandy. No last name, no emoji, just that. Vanessa watched him carefully. "It's still active. It's been active for over 15 years. We had a permuted tech team pull the message logs. Don't worry, only the metadata. No invasions of privacy." She paused, letting that land. "But what we did see were hundreds of unsent messages. Drafts, kept, saved, never delivered." Keanu looked down at the phone. His thumb hovered over the messages icon. With a trembling hand, he clicked it open. There they were, pages and pages of texts. Dates spanning back to 2008. A few typed at 2 a.m., others at the edge of holidays. Always saved, never sent. Vanessa leaned in again. What did you say in them? His voice cracked. Everything I didn't say in real life. She nodded. Tell us. He stared at the screen, scrolling slowly. His lips moved silently as he read to himself. Then he found one, paused, and read it aloud. I saw your smile on a billboard today, and I forgot to breathe. Another, happy birthday. I wanted to call, but I thought hearing my voice might ruin your day. Another, I was going to tell you that night, but I choked. And I've been choking ever since. His hand dropped to the table, still holding the phone. Tears slipped from the corners of his eyes. Not loudly, not for show. They just came, as if this moment had waited too long to arrive. Vanessa's tone softened, but only slightly. You wrote them, you held them, but you never hit send. Keanu nodded, eyes brimming. She asked gently, why not? He looked at her, broken open now, and answered with the quiet truth that had haunted him for 3 decades. Because I didn't believe I deserved her. Vanessa sat back in her chair, letting that answer settle like a final chord after a symphony. It was not the soundbite she had expected. Not a media-savvy quote. Not a crafted redemption arc. Just a man, stripped bare, admitting what most people never had the courage to say, even to themselves. Keanu held the phone in both hands, as though it were the last piece of someone he had loved in silence. The screen dimmed. He didn't wake it again. Vanessa folded her notes slowly. You've made dozens of movies, traveled the world, given millions to people you'll never meet. You're adored, Keanu. People speak about you like you're a saint, and yet, this is the one thing you couldn't do. He nodded without argument. I could fight for everyone else, just not for myself. Vanessa's voice dropped to a quieter register. You said earlier this isn't about fixing anything, that you're not trying to rewrite the past. But after 30 years, sitting here now, is there still a part of you that hopes? Keanu didn't speak for a while. Then, softly, he said, I think the part of me that hopes is the part that refused to let this phone go. Even when I switched devices, even when I changed cities, even when it hurt. He looked up again. That hope never died. I just buried it under the belief that I didn't earn the right to try again. Vanessa tilted her head. And now? He inhaled deeply. Now I'm not trying to earn anything. I'm just telling the truth. She watched him for a long beat. Then she said, there's something extraordinary about carrying love that long, but also something devastating. He nodded. It island. Vanessa looked down at the closed folder in front of her. She had more questions, more photos, more lines to push, but suddenly they felt unnecessary. The story had already spoken. The man in front of her wasn't unraveling for television. He wasn't melting down for drama. He was finally, painfully, letting go of the silence that had eaten away at him for most of his adult life. Keanu placed the old flip phone on the table between them. For a moment, it looked like an artifact, a relic. But in truth, it was more than that. It was a graveyard of unsent love letters, a diary with no reader, a lifeline he never had the courage to throw. He whispered, more to the phone than to Vanessa. I'm sorry I waited. She said, nothing. There was nothing left to press, only a story that was still unfolding. And somewhere across the country, maybe in a quiet room with the lights off, maybe with her own phone in hand, Sandra was listening. The television cast a soft blue glow over the living room walls. The rest of the house was silent. Sandra sat alone on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The CNN logo shimmered in the corner of the screen, muted under the weight of what had just been said. Keanu's voice still echoed in her ears. I did. Completely. She didn't move. She couldn't. On the screen, Vanessa Klein leaned in again, her words sharp, pressing him harder. Sandra heard her own name spoken like a question, like a challenge, like a confession waiting for its echo. And then came the photos. She hadn't seen them in years, but she recognized them instantly. That party on the lot, the cake, the laughter. The moment he brushed frosting from her face while trying to look serious, but his eyes gave him away. She remembered the photographer, a kid from the grip team who asked them to pose, but they didn't. They were already in the moment. They always had been. Now the world could see it. And as the images rolled across the screen, Sandra felt something inside her shatter. Not from pain, from memory. Flashbacks rose unbidden late-night rehearsals. Keanu sitting beside her in the makeup trailer, sipping coffee and scribbling notes on his script. The way he never interrupted. The way he listened. The way he laughed, not loudly, but in that soft, sincere way that made her feel like she'd just said something brilliant without trying. She remembered a day between shoots. They had finished early, and the rest of the crew had cleared out. She'd found Keanu reading quietly by the catering truck. Instead of leaving him alone, she sat down next to him, her shoulder brushing his. He didn't flinch. He just looked over and said, "Nice weather for quiet." They stayed there for hours. No headlines, no witnesses, just two people pretending that what they had wasn't rare. Back in the present, the interview continued. Vanessa had just pulled out the flip phone, and now Sandra watched as Keanu opened it with trembling hands, revealing her name still saved after all this time. The camera cut in closer as he scrolled through the unsent messages. Her name was everywhere, in every draft, in every whisper of longing that had never made it to her. Her assistant, Marnie, had been standing in the doorway, unsure if she should stay. She watched Sandra's shoulders rise with each quiet breath, the way her eyes filled but refused to blink. Then Keanu said it. "Every woman I ever dated, I was looking for her." The moment shattered her. Sandra's hand came up to her mouth as the first sob broke loose. Not loud, not dramatic, just years of confusion, anger, love, and silence collapsing in on itself. Marnie stepped forward, but Sandra raised one hand gently. "Please, don't." Marnie nodded once, then quietly left the room. Sandra stared at the screen, her body trembling as tears streamed down her face. And for the first time in decades, she heard what she had always needed. The screen flickered slightly as the studio lights on Keanu's face shifted. His voice softened now, no longer guarded, no longer protected by charm or vagueness. It was raw, unfiltered. A man finally unburdening himself not to the world, but to the woman he had carried in silence for decades. Sandra leaned forward. Her elbows rested on her knees, her fingers interlocked. The tears had not stopped, but they no longer fell in anguish. They streamed with something else, recognition maybe. Regret, yes, but also relief. "I used to think," Keanu said, his gaze locked with the camera, "that loving her meant staying away, that it was better to protect what we had by never crossing that line. I thought I was doing the right thing, but the truth is, I was scared." He paused, swallowed hard. "I didn't think I was enough." Sandra closed her eyes. She had told herself those same words once, sitting alone in her trailer the morning after the beach. She had reread the note he left at least 50 times. And every time, her heart had whispered, "He's scared." But fear was contagious. She hadn't replied because she didn't trust herself not to fall all the way in. And now, hearing him say it, out loud, to the world, it undid something in her, a knot she didn't know she'd kept tied. On screen, Vanessa had gone quiet. For once, she didn't interrupt. Even she could see the gravity of what was happening. Keanu wasn't performing. He wasn't playing a part. This was him bare, trembling, honest. "I never stopped thinking about her," he continued. "Every time I saw a smile that felt familiar. Every time I heard someone laugh, the way she used to when I said something dumb. Every woman I ever dated, it was her shadow I was chasing." Sandra let out a broken exhale. Her hands trembled against each other. She looked around the quiet room as if expecting someone to say something, to confirm she wasn't imagining this. But it was just her, just Keanu, and the years between them. She whispered aloud, "Why now?" But even as she asked it, she knew the answer. Some silences screamed louder with time. Some confessions can't wait another day. He was trying to find her, not on the phone, not through agents, not through friends, but here, in this moment, with the only platform that could reach her in a way words hadn't before, through truth, raw and public. "I saved her number all these years," Keanu said, lifting the old phone again. Every time I wanted to dial, I thought, what if she moved on? What if she hates me? What if I ruin the one thing I never wanted to lose? The camera didn't cut away. It stayed on him, steady. His hands gripped the arms of the chair. His jaw tightened. I don't know if she's watching, he said, his voice trembling. But if she is, I need her to know. I loved her. I never stopped. Sandra stood up slowly. Her breath was uneven. Her arms hugged her torso like she was trying to hold the pieces of herself together. She walked toward the television. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. She touched her own name on the screen. Not a headline, not a character, just her. Then she whispered something no one else could hear, but Keanu would have known what it meant. The air in the studio felt different now. Vanessa, who had come prepared to poke and prod, now sat quietly, her notepad resting on the table, untouched. Her pen, once eager, now still in her fingers. Across from her, Keanu took a deep breath. His hands were no longer trembling, but there was something almost sacred about the way he moved now, like he knew this next part wasn't just confession, it was surrender. I want to show you something, he said gently, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a small, folded photograph. Time had softened its edges, and the once sharp colors had begun to fade. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, unsure if she should speak. She didn't. Keanu turned the photo toward the camera. It showed a white two-story house nestled in a patch of trees, somewhere clearly rural. A wide porch, rocking chairs, a single light above the door. There was a swing set out back, weather-worn, but still standing. I bought this house in 2010, he said quietly. Upstate New York. It's been empty since the day I signed the papers. Vanessa blinked. Why? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Because it wasn't for me. He turned the photo back toward himself, ran a thumb across it. Sandra and I once had this conversation back in '95, I think. We were in a van between scenes. I asked her where she would live if none of this Hollywood stuff mattered. He looked up. She said a little white house by a lake in upstate New York, somewhere with trees that changed color in the fall, a fireplace, a garden. She even said she wanted a tire swing. Vanessa's voice finally cracked the silence. So you bought her that dream? No, he said. I bought her the memory of it, the possibility. I never told her. I kept it. She stared. You kept a house untouched for 13 years? 14, Keanu said softly. Every few months, I'd fly out. Mow the lawn, replace a shingle. Make sure the pipes didn't freeze in the winter. I'd sit on the porch for a couple hours and wonder if maybe, someday, she'd show up. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came. Keanu placed the photo gently on the table between them. Then he pulled out a second item, an envelope, yellowed with age. I wrote her this letter in 1997, he said, after we ran into each other at a film festival in Telluride. We hugged for 23 seconds. I counted. It was the closest I'd felt to home in years. He held the letter in his hand, thumb trembling now as he opened it. The paper inside was creased a dozen times, the ink slightly smudged. I never sent it, he said, but I want to read it now. Vanessa's hands dropped into her lap. Her eyes were glassy. The whole world, watching from screens across cities and time zones, leaned in. Keanu cleared his throat and began to read. Dear Sandy, I don't know if you'll ever read this. Maybe it's just for me. Maybe it's the only way I'll ever find the courage to say what I never could back then. Telluride brought back everything. The way you smiled that night, it was the same smile from the rap party. The one I tried so hard to forget. The one that made my knees weak and my heart race like it was late to something important. I lied when I said I was fine. I wasn't. I haven't been since the beach. Keanu paused, eyes lingering on the edges of the page. His voice cracked on the next line, and for a moment, he had to take a breath. You asked me not to say it, unless I meant it forever. That's why I didn't say it that night. Because I did, and forever terrified me. I didn't believe I could be someone worth keeping. You were so full of light. I was already carrying shadows I didn't know how to explain. But Sandy, I still went to the beach the next morning. hoping maybe you'd be there. I wanted to take it all back, to say it, to hold your hand and not let go. I've written you hundreds of letters since, some angry, some grateful, most of them unfinished. But this one, I finished, because I need you to know I've never stopped loving you. Not once, not for a day. Not even in the silence. Every role I took, I imagined what you'd think. Every time I saw your name on a movie poster, I'd buy a ticket and sit in the back row. I laughed when you laughed. I cried when you cried. You've lived in my heart longer than anyone ever has. There's a White House in upstate New York, just like the one you dreamed of. It has a tire swing. I put it up myself. I go there sometimes to remind myself that love doesn't have to be loud or perfect. It just has to wait. And I waited. I still am. Keanu _. The studio was silent. Even Vanessa, sharp as she had been, sat stunned. Her eyes blinked rapidly, as if processing a language she had never spoken before. Keanu gently folded the letter and placed it beside the photo. I don't know if she'll ever see this, he said, voice low. But if she does, I hope she knows this wasn't about regret. It was about truth. And the truth is, I loved her. I still do. For a moment, even the cameras felt like they were holding their breath. Vanessa leaned back slowly. Keanu, why now? He looked straight ahead, not at her, not at the lights, but at the lens, as if through it, he could see Sandra's face. Because I'm tired of pretending that silence is noble. It's just fear wearing a tuxedo. Vanessa waited for the moment. The room had quieted. The air was still thick with the weight of Keanu's confession. Then, she reached under her desk and tapped a small remote. A screen behind her flickered to life. The image was grainy at first, then sharpened, behind-the-scenes footage from the set of The Lake House, 2005. It showed Keanu and Sandra walking through a rehearsal. Quiet, focused, professional. But then there was a cut, a moment between scenes, when they weren't performing. Sandra stood off to the side in a long brown coat. Keanu walked up behind her with 2 cups of tea. She turned, startled, then smiled. Not a polite smile, not a co-star smile. It was softer, familiar. He handed her the tea. They spoke, and though the audio was muted, it was the way their eyes met that said everything. And then, they held hands. No fanfare, no stage direction. Just fingers slipping into one another like it was a habit neither had unlearned. A voice cut in over the footage. It was an interview clip from one of the assistant directors. That wasn't acting. That was muscle memory. Vanessa turned back to Keanu. He didn't flinch at the video. He watched it carefully, even smiled a little at the memory. Were you two close again during the filming of The Lake House? She asked carefully, her tone stripped of the previous edge. Keanu nodded once, slowly. We got close, very close, he said. It felt like stepping back into something we hadn't finished, like a song you loved but never heard the ending to. Vanessa leaned forward. So what happened? Keanu exhaled, his hands now folded tightly in his lap. She had just adopted her first child, he said. A beautiful boy, Louis. She was becoming a mother. She had this whole new purpose, this new light around her. And I. He stopped for a moment, searching for words that wouldn't sound like an excuse, though every word already felt like one. I thought I'd be a burden, not a blessing. Vanessa looked stunned, almost sad. A burden? She repeated. I was in a dark place back then, Keanu continued. Not publicly, not in the way people might assume, but emotionally. I was grieving, still carrying ghosts. And the idea of entering her life at that moment felt selfish. He glanced back at the screen, where another short clip played Sandra laughing as Keanu spun her around after a take. The kind of laughter you don't fake. The kind that makes people watching smile instinctively. I wanted her to know peace, he said. To have stability, safety, joy. And I didn't think I could give that. So I did what I always did. I stepped back. Vanessa didn't respond right away. The air had shifted again. This wasn't tabloid fodder anymore. This was a man dissecting a decision that had haunted him for nearly 2 decades. Keanu blinked slowly. I had the chance. She was right there. But instead of reaching for her, I stood still, and she walked forward. Vanessa looked down at her notes, then slowly set them aside. Keanu, she said, her voice gentler now. Do you think she ever knew how much you loved her? I don't know, he said quietly, but I hope after today she does. The screen behind them faded to black. Silence hovered, stretching long enough to make everyone in the studio forget there were cameras still rolling. Vanessa finally broke the quiet. Do you regret it? She asked. Keanu nodded without hesitation. Every single day, he said. There's not a morning I don't wake up and wonder what life might have looked like if I had just said something. If I'd chosen courage over caution. He shifted in his seat, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket. Slowly, he pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed at the edges, soft from years of being handled. Vanessa raised her eyebrows. This, Keanu began, was something I wrote the night the lake house wrapped. I never gave it to her. He looked down at the paper, his hands trembling slightly. It's not a letter. It's not even a note. It's just what I was feeling that night. Vanessa said nothing. She simply gave a small nod, inviting him to go on. Keanu unfolded it carefully, his eyes scanning the page like he needed to reconnect with the man who had written it nearly 2 decades earlier. I wrote, he began slowly, you smiled at me today, and I swear the years between us disappeared. You weren't a co-star. I wasn't an actor. We were just us, again, standing in the wind by the lake, not speaking, just holding that moment like it was borrowed from some other life. He paused, the words sticking in his throat. I wrote, I almost told you I loved you, but I didn't. Because I didn't want to steal your peace, your new beginning. I didn't want to be the man who confused you when you had just found your purpose. So instead, I watched you leave. And when you waved from the car, I wished I could have waved back from forever. Keanu folded the paper again, slowly. The entire studio had fallen still. Even Vanessa couldn't find words right away. Her voice, when it returned, was quiet. And she never saw that? He shook his head. Number. I kept it. Like I kept everything. The letters, the drafts, the unsent texts, the house. I just kept loving her, quietly, from a distance. Vanessa blinked quickly, swallowing hard. Why today? She asked. Because I'm tired, he whispered. Tired of hiding a love that shaped my life. Tired of pretending that silence was strength. I don't know what happens next, but I know this: if she's watching, I want her to hear it from me. Finally, he turned slightly, looking directly into the lens. Sandra, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was always you. Somewhere in Austin, Sandra pressed her hand to her heart. She had waited years for that sentence. Not from a script, not on screen, but from him. The studio lights dimmed. No one moved, and across the world, 1 million viewers suddenly understood they weren't just watching a confession, they were witnessing history. The screen faded to black for a moment, before gently dissolving into a quiet montage. The years unfolded like a flickering reel of what could have beens, missed calls. Some dated as far back as 1996. One rang out at 2:13 a.m. Another ended after just one ring. Then another, just the name Sandy, flashing silently on a cracked screen with the words "call failed" below it, over and over, year after year. Vanessa didn't speak. She didn't need to. On the table in front of them sat a stack of tabloid magazines. Each cover screamed a different narrative. Keanu's secret romance, Sandra's mystery man, on-screen chemistry, off-screen sparks. Their faces were plastered side by side on headlines they never authorized, smiles that told stories, none of them true, relationships they never had, weddings they never planned, breakups that never happened because none of it was real, except what was. I kept thinking, Keanu finally said, his voice cracking ever so slightly, that maybe if I buried myself in work, if I stayed just out of reach, I could protect what little peace she had. I didn't want to become another Hollywood heartbreak for her. Another reason she'd build more walls. Vanessa glanced at the stack. So instead, you became the ghost in every room she walked into. Keanu didn't deny it. His eyes stayed locked on one particular magazine cover from 2006, the year The Lake House came out. Their faces were close, smiling. A behind-the-scenes photo. She was laughing. He was looking at her, not the camera. The headline read, "Is this the real love story?" He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly. I remember that day. She had just told a joke about the catering running out of cake, and he stopped, blinking away the memory. I looked at her like she was the last sunrise I'd ever see. The studio went still. Vanessa leaned forward. Why didn't you act on it then? That was 10 years after Speed. A fresh start. A second chance. He looked up, not at her, but past her, as if seeing a version of himself that still lived in the space between those 2 decades. She had just adopted her son, Keanu said softly. I remember seeing her holding him between takes, rocking him in one of those canvas baby carriers. There was peace in her eyes, not the kind from falling in love, the kind that came from having something finally feel right. And I didn't want to be the variable that risked it all. Vanessa's lips parted to speak, but no words came out, not yet. Instead, Keanu reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. The edges were frayed, the ink slightly smudged. Time had tried to erase it, but not enough. I wrote this after that shoot. Never sent it, just kept it. He unfolded it slowly. His hands trembled. Sandra, he read. I know I smile too much when I'm around you, and I know it probably makes you think I'm fine. But the truth is, I'm not fine. Not when you walk away, not when I see you hold your son like the world finally makes sense. Because that's what you are to me, sense. You're the answer I've been scared to ask. He stopped reading. His voice was barely audible now. I kept writing letters like this. Hundreds, Vanessa whispered. You never sent a single one? Keanu's head dropped. Not one. Vanessa slowly reached for the letter. She didn't open it. She didn't need to. The pain in Keanu's voice had already painted every word. What could have been read in seconds had been lived through decades. And it wasn't just a letter, it was a map of detours, of missed turns, of unspoken things that should have been shouted. Do you know what I don't understand? She asked after a long silence. You've been in love with her for 30 years. The world saw it. Your friends saw it. Even she must have seen it. So why did you both keep pretending? Keanu exhaled slowly. Because sometimes pretending is the only way to survive the truth. We both had so much to lose. Timing was always cruel. When I was finally ready, she was healing. When she was open, I was broken. We never aligned. Not once. The screen behind them shifted again, this time to a black and white collage of text messages, drafts never sent. Some were one-liners, some were essays. I saw your interview. You look tired. Are you okay? I passed by that bookshop in Santa Monica. They still have the Jane Austen section. Happy birthday. I still remember the cinnamon cupcakes. Over 300 unsent messages. Vanessa stared. You saved all of them. I couldn't delete hope, Keanu said. A pause. Vanessa leaned back in her chair and studied him. Do you think she knew you were writing them? He shook his head. Maybe. But knowing and believing are different things. She nodded slowly, then asked the question that had lingered for years in the minds of fans, friends, maybe even Sandra herself. Did she love you? The words hung in the air like a final note of a symphony, desperate to land, afraid of the silence that would follow. Keanu's eyes glistened. He looked down at his hands, took a breath, then another. She did, he said, his voice breaking. She loved me in all the ways that mattered, quietly, fiercely, from a distance. She rooted for me, protected my name when others tried to twist it. She laughed at jokes that weren't funny, just to make me feel good. She noticed when I was hiding pain. She stayed when others walked away. Vanessa's throat tightened. Even the cameramen had gone quiet. No headset chatter, no whispers, no cues. Just a room full of people watching a man bleed truth. So why didn't you believe it? she finally asked. Because I didn't love myself, Keanu said. Not enough to believe someone like her could see something good in me. It wasn't self-pity, it was confession, and it hit with the weight of 30 years. The screen changed one final time. A grainy behind-the-scenes photo from the Speed premiere. Sandra in a black gown, Keanu in a charcoal suit, standing next to each other, not touching. But if you looked closely, if you really looked, his hand was hovering just behind her lower back, inches away, as if even then he wanted to hold her, but didn't. And for 30 years, that distance never truly disappeared. The studio lights hummed softly as the air turned electric. Keanu sat in silence, his hands trembling slightly as he held the old Motorola flip phone in his lap. Every camera in the studio was trained on him, but in that moment, the world around him faded. The phone felt heavier than ever before, like it carried 30 years of everything unsaid. Vanessa, now silent herself, gave a small nod. No words were needed. She knew what he was about to do. So did he. Keanu opened the phone with a slow, deliberate click. He scrolled to the only contact stored in it. Sandy. His thumb hovered, then pressed call. The audience watching at home couldn't breathe. The crew behind the cameras froze. Vanessa didn't dare speak. One ring, 2, 3, then a soft click. A voice. Hi, Keanu. Just 2 words, but they landed like a meteor into the silence. Keanu's eyes welled instantly. His lips parted, but no sound came at first. On the other end, Sandra Bullock sat curled up on her couch in Austin, Texas, knees drawn to her chest, the television still glowing in front of her. She had answered the call with her whole heart already broken open. I've been watching, she whispered, her voice raw and trembling. Since the beginning. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. The producers in the control booth froze. Someone knocked over a water bottle and didn't even notice. Keanu looked down, exhaled shakily, and managed a faint smile through the emotion rising in his chest. I didn't know if you would, he said quietly. Sandra laughed, softly through the tears she was already wiping away. I almost didn't, but then you pulled out the phone. They both knew what it meant. That phone wasn't just some nostalgic relic, it was a living time capsule. A vault of feelings locked away, hidden from the world, preserved through years of silence and solitude. Keanu gripped the phone a little tighter. I kept your number saved. Even when everyone else changed. Even when phones changed. It was always you. Sandra was quiet on the line, but her breathing deepened. The world didn't need to see her face to know she was crying now too. I never changed it, she said softly. Not once. I always wondered if one day it would ring, but you never called. I was scared, he admitted. Scared of ruining the image you had of me. Scared of making you uncomfortable. Scared that maybe I waited too long. Sandra's pause was long and aching. But Keanu, you never ruined anything. I waited too. I just didn't know I was allowed to. The air shifted in the room. Every person behind a screen watching felt it. The walls between them were dissolving, and what was left was nothing but the naked truth of 2 people who had loved each other, quietly, painfully, for decades. Keanu let out a breath. Sandra, she whispered back. I'm here. Keanu's throat tightened as he heard those 2 words. I'm here. He closed his eyes, and in that instant, it wasn't CNN. It wasn't an international audience. It was just the 2 of them, suspended in a moment they had been circling for decades. Vanessa sat back slowly, her role as interviewer dissolved. She became just another witness to something rare, 2 hearts finding their voice after years of silence. Why didn't we talk sooner? Sandra asked. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just filled with that aching sadness of knowing how much time had passed. We were always so close, but always at the wrong moment. Keanu nodded, even though she couldn't see it. I think I always believed you deserved better. You were raising your son. You had this light in your life, and I wasn't sure I could match it. Sandra let out a small, trembling breath. But I never needed someone to match it. I just needed someone to see it, and you always did. For a long time, Neither spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was sacred. The silence felt like a bridge spanning across decades, finally being walked. Keanu opened his eyes. "That house," he said. "The one in upstate New York." Sandra's breath hitched. "The white one? With the porch swing? I bought it for you," he said. "I kept the garden the way you described. I'd drive up when things got hard, sit on the porch, mow the lawn, tell myself maybe someday you'd be there." Sandra was quiet. Then her voice broke through, trembling. "That's why I could never find it again. I thought maybe I imagined it." "No," he said. "It was always real, just waiting." She sniffled. "You waited for me?" "I didn't wait well," he said gently, "but I never stopped hoping." There was a long pause. Then Sandra whispered something that made the studio crew glance at each other, stunned. "I watched The Lake House again last night. I cried the whole time." Keanu smiled faintly. "Me too. It wasn't just a movie for me," she said. "It was everything we never said. Every pause, every almost." "I know," Keanu said. "I felt it too." Vanessa, still seated nearby, leaned in slightly. "Sandra," she asked softly, "can I ask you something?" There was a pause. Then Sandra replied, "Go ahead. Did you love him?" There was no hesitation. "I did," she said, voice steady. "I do." Keanu's head dropped, his hand covering his mouth, overwhelmed. The weight of 30 years of misunderstanding, of hesitation, of hiding love behind friendship and timing, it all came crashing down in that one answer. The studio fell completely silent. Sandra continued, "But I didn't know if he ever really saw me that way. He was always so careful, so quiet. And I figured maybe he just didn't feel the same." "I felt everything," Keanu whispered. "I just didn't believe I deserved you." "But you do," she said, without flinching. "You always did." The screen split gently as the broadcast continued, revealing Sandra on the other side of the call. She was in a softly lit room, simple and unglamorous, her face bare of makeup, her hair tied loosely. But her eyes, those familiar, expressive eyes, were brimming with emotion. She looked directly at the camera, but it felt like she was speaking only to him. "I was already in love with you on the first day," Sandra said. The studio fell silent. Even Vanessa lowered her clipboard. Keanu's head tilted slightly, as if his breath had caught. The control room could be seen scrambling in the background, unsure if this was still an interview or something else entirely. "I remember the first table read," Sandra continued. "I was shaking. I'd just come off a tough breakup. I felt small, like I didn't belong in that room. And you, Keanu, you didn't say much, but you sat down beside me and passed me a little post-it." Keanu's lips parted. He remembered. Sandra smiled through her tears. "It said, 'You belong here more than anyone,' and you looked at me like you meant it, like you saw me." Keanu's eyes began to glisten. "That one note," she said softly, "made me brave enough to believe in myself again. Not just as an actress, as a person. That was the beginning for me." She paused, swallowed hard. "But I didn't want to rush anything," she said. "I thought we were both healing, and then things got complicated. We got famous, really famous, and we started protecting ourselves." Keanu nodded faintly, barely blinking. "I saw the way you looked at me sometimes," Sandra went on, "and I knew you felt it too, but I didn't want to say anything you weren't ready to hear, because the truth is," she exhaled slowly, "I never stopped waiting for you to stop running." Vanessa covered her mouth. The studio lights flickered slightly, as if the entire world had leaned in. "I wasn't waiting for a man," Sandra said. "Steady now. I was waiting for you." The silence that followed didn't feel like dead air. It felt sacred. Keanu placed a hand on his chest, barely able to contain the tidal wave rising behind his calm face. "And all those years," Sandra said, voice trembling, "I kept telling myself, maybe one day, when he's done saving the world, he'll come back for me." Keanu wiped a tear away with the back of his hand. "You didn't need to say anything," Sandra whispered. "You already said everything in the way you looked at me when you thought no one else was watching." Keanu opened his mouth. but nothing came out. His throat closed with emotion. He pressed his lips together and nodded slowly, as if each word Sandra said peeled back years of silence he had buried deep inside him. "I remember," he finally whispered. "That post-it, I carried the other half in my wallet for years." Sandra laughed softly, surprised. "You did?" He nodded again. "It was torn from a bigger note. You kept the half with the message. I kept the half with your handwriting." A stunned hush settled over the studio. Vanessa stared at the screen, silent now. Her role had transformed from interviewer to observer, watching something sacred unfold. Sandra's smile deepened, touched with pain and joy. "Keanu, do you know how many times I wanted to call you? I'd see your name trending and wonder, is this it? Is this when he reaches out?" Keanu looked down at his old flip phone resting in his palm. It was still open, still connected. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "But I didn't want to interfere with your life," Sandra continued. "I figured maybe he moved on. Maybe I was just a soft chapter in a very loud book." "You were the whole book," Keanu said quietly. The crew behind Sandra froze. The audio tech wiped his eyes. Even Vanessa seemed overwhelmed, clenching the arms of her chair. Sandra blinked, overwhelmed. "You were always better with quiet words. I never had the courage to say them when they mattered," he replied. "You were building your family. You were being brave. And I just stood on the sidelines and watched." A long breath passed through the broadcast like a wave between them. "I saw photos of you with your son," Keanu said, "and you were radiant. That kind of joy scared me. I thought I'd ruin it, that maybe I'd come back and mess up something pure." Sandra shook her head. "That's where you've always been wrong. Love doesn't ruin things. It heals them." She paused, then added, "And you were never the outsider, Keanu. You were the part I never let go of." There was a pause, thick with history. Vanessa, trembling slightly, finally found her voice. "Sandra, may I ask something?" Sandra nodded gently. "When you say you never let go, does that mean you still feel it now?" Sandra's eyes flickered. "I do. No hesitation, no fear. I still feel it every time I hear his voice, every time I watch our scenes together, every time someone asks me if I ever truly loved anyone." Vanessa leaned forward, completely absorbed. "Then why didn't you ever tell him?" Sandra smiled, not with regret, but clarity. "Because I didn't want him to hear it from a headline. I wanted to tell him in a way that mattered. Like this." Keanu covered his mouth briefly, trying to breathe through the storm inside his chest. "I wanted to tell him on a day when the world would stop, when it would all be quiet enough for him to actually hear me." Then her voice dropped to a whisper. "And I think today, it finally island." Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes wet, but no tears fell. The silence between them was no longer filled with absence, but acknowledgement. Years of doubt, of second-guessing, of timing that never worked, melted in that single moment. "I hear you," he said, voice soft but unwavering. Sandra smiled, eyes glistening. Then, "Maybe it's time we stop running." The screen remained split, two faces framed by decades of longing. No one watching would ever forget this moment. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was finally real. And for the first time in 30 years, they weren't almost, they were finally here. Keanu held the small envelope in his hands like it was sacred. The cameras had stopped panning. The crew barely breathed. Even Vanessa, who had spent the past hour unflinchingly digging through Keanu's emotional archives, was silent. He looked at the yellowed paper creased, worn, folded, and refolded over time. Then he slowly unfolded it. "This," Keanu began, his voice soft and hoarse, "is the letter I wrote the night she called me about Speed 2. A hush fell across the room. He paused, eyes flicking toward the crew, toward Vanessa, and then toward the red light on the main camera. He knew Sandra was watching. Somewhere, likely still sitting in that quiet room where she'd watched his heart bleed for an hour, she was hearing this. Every word, every tremble. "She asked me that night if I was going to do the movie," Keanu said, "and I told her I didn't think it was right for me. But the truth is, this letter explains why I really said no. He opened the folded paper. His hands shook slightly. His voice cracked as he began to read. The 18th of June, 1996. Sandy, I told you tonight that the script didn't speak to me, that I wanted to take a break, or that the timing felt wrong. I lied, not to hurt you, but to save myself. The truth is, pretending to fall in love with you again on camera would destroy me. Not because I don't want to, but because I wouldn't know how to stop. You were never pretend for me, not for a second. Every scene, every smile, every moment on that bus, it was all real. It terrified me then. It terrifies me now. Keanu stopped reading for a moment, swallowing the lump in his throat. Vanessa's eyes were glassy. No one interrupted. He continued. You once told me that you liked me because I never tried to impress you. But that's the lie I've lived every day since we met. I've done nothing but try to become a man worthy of your attention. You're the bravest person I know, Sandy. You dive into things head first. Life, love, people. And I hold back. I always hold back. So when the studio called and offered us Speed 2, I sat with it. I held the script in one hand and your name in the other. And I thought to myself, if I step onto that boat, look into your eyes, and say, I love you again, I won't come back the same. Because I already do. And I don't know how to live with that. Keanu's voice broke. He lowered the paper for a moment, tears sliding down his cheek. He didn't wipe them, he let them fall. Then he raised the letter again. So instead, I'll stay back. I'll cheer for you from afar. I'll watch the premiere and say it looks great. But I'll know I missed the boat. Literally and figuratively. I love you, Sandra Bullock, but I'm too scared to lose you forever by risking everything now. He folded the letter back in silence, his hands trembling. The silence that followed was unlike anything the studio had ever experienced. It wasn't awkward or tense. It was sacred. No music, no commentary, just stillness. Keanu placed the folded letter on the small table beside him. His eyes remained glassy but focused, as though letting go of the letter also meant releasing the years of self-protection he'd built around that truth. Vanessa finally whispered, Did she ever read that letter? Keanu shook his head. Number, I never sent it. I wrote it. Then I buried it in a shoebox with a dozen other things I didn't have the courage to say. I figured the moment had passed. That I'd made my decision. That she moved on. And honestly, I didn't think I deserved to ask her to come back. Vanessa leaned forward, trying to hold the moment still. And now, Keanu exhaled, slowly. I think I still don't deserve it. But I know love isn't about deserving. It's about showing up. And the truth is, that house I told you about, the one in upstate New York, it's still waiting. The door is still unlocked. The grass is still mowed. And the guest room still has sheets she picked out in 2005. Vanessa's voice cracked just slightly. So, if she's watching right now? Keanu nodded, slowly, before speaking again. I just want her to know. I never stopped hoping. Even when I told myself I had. Even when the world told us to move on. Even when our lives became too complicated and timing kept getting it wrong, I still hoped. He turned to the camera, not for drama, but because it was the only way to say what he needed to say. Sandy, if you still feel anything close to what we felt back then, if even a piece of you is still holding on to that same wild, strange magic, I'll be at the house. He paused, choosing his words with reverence. I'll meet you there. No cameras, no scripts, just us. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to call. Just show up. I'll be on the porch, like I've always been. And I'll wait. The studio lights dimmed slightly, as if the whole world was taking a deep breath together. Vanessa placed her hand over her mouth, overwhelmed by the sheer vulnerability unfolding before her. And then, for the first time in over an hour, the studio's monitor shifted. It wasn't planned. It wasn't prompted. A video call request lit up on Vanessa's control screen, unmistakable. Sandra Bullock live. Her crew looked at her in disbelief. She hesitated, looked at Keanu, then pressed accept. The screen filled with her face. Sandra was sitting in a warmly lit room, clearly at home. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, eyes red from crying, but her smile was the same one that had graced movie screens for decades. "Hi," she said softly. "I didn't think I'd cry that much." Keanu's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Sandra took a deep breath. "I read the letter, just now. I read every word with my whole heart." He blinked. "You did?" "I printed it. From the closed captioning," she said, laughing gently through her tears. "And if you're serious," she paused. Her eyes locked on his. "I've already packed." 2 weeks passed. The noise didn't. Headlines still pulsed across every entertainment site. Analysts on talk shows debated whether it was a PR stunt or the most honest confession Hollywood had ever witnessed. Fans dug up old interviews, freeze-framed behind-the-scenes footage, and rewatched Speed in the lake house like archaeologists unearthing buried treasure. Everyone wanted to know, would Sandra go to the house? Paparazzi staked out the property in upstate New York. They camped at the end of the long gravel driveway, lenses trained on the wooden gate. But nothing moved. The curtain stayed drawn. The mailbox sat untouched. Some speculated she had already gone and left. Others insisted she would never show. Theories bloomed, then wilted, then were replaced with wilder ones. Keanu was silent. Not a single public appearance, no interviews, no statements. He had vanished into the quiet he always sought, this time with the weight of the world pressing on his back. But he waited. Inside the house, the same furniture remained. The walls still bore faint pencil lines from when he'd measured where her favorite paintings might go. A throw blanket she once admired, light blue, almost silver in the sun, sat folded on the edge of the couch. The fridge was empty, save for bottled water and a single bottle of white wine she once mentioned liking in a 2004 interview. He kept it unopened for years. Each morning, Keanu walked the garden, trimmed the hedge, mowed the lawn. He wore old jeans and a hoodie, looking more like a tired landscaper than a movie star. He didn't pace, he just waited. Not desperately, not expectantly, but with a kind of quiet hope that had sustained him for decades. If she came, it would be enough. If she didn't, it would still have meant something because he'd finally spoken. Then, on a quiet Tuesday morning, something changed. A black SUV approached the gate. It didn't stop. It glided in like it belonged. Cameras hidden in the bushes clicked furiously. The world would see the photos within hours, but in that moment no one knew what to say, because it wasn't a dramatic entrance. Sandra didn't wave. She didn't wear sunglasses. She wore no makeup, just jeans and a cardigan. Her hair was tied back. She carried nothing but a small leather satchel. She paused before the front door, took a breath, and knocked. Keanu opened it before the second knock landed. No one spoke. Her eyes were red, but not from crying, just tired, maybe from years of carrying what never got to be said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I left everything just the way you dreamed it." Sandra stepped inside. The door closed behind her. No photos were leaked that day. Not from inside. Not a sound escaped the house. The crew camped outside, watched the lights flicker on in the living room, then upstairs. Then, the place went still. For hours. One photographer swore he heard piano music. Another said he saw them through the window, sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, just talking. It wasn't until the next morning that the world finally saw it. The photo appeared on a small fan account first. Then it spread like wildfire. No headline, no caption. Just an image. Keanu and Sandra in the garden, late afternoon light draped over them like silk. They were sitting side by side on a weathered bench beneath a willow tree. Her hand was in his. Not gripping, not pulling, just resting there like it had always belonged. He wasn't looking at her, and she wasn't looking at him. They were both facing forward, eyes closed, like they were finally breathing after 30 years of holding it in. There were no bodyguards in sight, no stylists, no publicists, just two people in clothes too wrinkled for a magazine shoot, barefoot in the grass. The only sound you could almost imagine was the wind, the willow branches swaying overhead. The soft hush of old secrets no longer needing to be hidden. It wasn't the kind of picture that screamed romance. It whispered history. Someone zoomed in and noticed the small smile on Sandra's face. Just barely there, but enough to break the hearts of a million fans who had waited silently for something real. Another fan dug into the metadata and confirmed the date, 2 days after the live interview. The world let out a collective breath. There were no follow-up interviews, no press release. The house phone went unanswered. Her publicist issued a generic, "no comment." His team said nothing at all. But that single image said everything they'd tried to deny for 3 decades. In the days that followed, a new kind of silence fell over the story. Not the silence of confusion, the silence of understanding. Like the ending of a favorite song that finally makes sense. Keanu and Sandra didn't owe anyone a performance. They didn't stage a reunion for headlines. They simply showed up for each other. And that became the most beautiful part of the story. Inside the house, time moved slowly. They cooked together. She made grilled cheese, and he over-toasted it by accident, just like he had on the set of Speed when they shared a trailer for the day. He remembered and laughed. She didn't. She cried instead. Because it was the first time in years she'd seen him laugh like that, unbothered, boyish, and safe. He asked her if she still had the dress she wore at the Lake House press conference. The blue one, with the buttons down the side. She blushed. "It's in my closet in LA." He nodded and poured her another glass of that white wine. They clinked glasses and sat in front of the fire. For a long time, neither spoke. At one point, Sandra asked, "Why now?" Keanu took a long sip before answering. "I think I ran out of excuses, and maybe I finally believe I'm not a burden." She didn't respond right away, but her hand found his again, this time not resting, but lacing through, fingers interlocked. No cameras saw that moment. No headlines caught it. It was just for them. But it was enough to rewrite the past. The garden bench became a quiet shrine for fans. A few left letters at the gate. Some wrote poetry, quoting lines from the lake house. Others simply wrote, "Thank you for showing us. It's never too late." The world had moved on. But Keanu and Sandra finally had paused. Together. Keanu stood at the edge of the garden, where sunlight met shadows. The grass had been freshly cut, not by a gardener, but by his own hands that morning. There was something sacred about doing it himself, like preparing a place not just for her return, but for his own reckoning with the past. Behind him, the old porch creaked gently in the breeze. The wind carried the scent of lilacs from a tree, Sandra once said, reminded her of home. And home, well, that was the thing, wasn't it? For years, he'd searched for one in the form of people, places, purpose, but somehow, it always circled back to her, not because she completed him in some cliché Hollywood way, but because when he was around her, he didn't have to be anyone else. And that freedom, that rare, soul-deep freedom, was the kind of love he'd never dared speak aloud. He looked to the side where a weathered bench sat under a maple tree, 2 coffee mugs resting atop it, one chipped, the other brand new, one from the past, one just bought last week. They were sitting there, like silent placeholders, like time itself had been waiting politely. "I used to think silence kept things safe," Keanu said, his voice calm but thick with weight. That not saying it out loud meant it couldn't fall apart. A pause. But the truth is, silence isn't safety. It's distance dressed in fear. For so long, he had walked that distance, convincing himself he was protecting her, protecting them both. Every decision not to call, not to write, not to ask her to meet him at that house, all of it had come from a place of love, twisted by doubt. He bent down and pulled a small weed from the soil. As he tossed it aside, his eyes drifted to the window. The curtain moved. She was there. He could feel her presence without seeing her. That was the way it always had been. He never had to search for her. She just existed in his atmosphere, like gravity, footsteps. Then the soft sound of a door opening. Sandra joined him in the garden, barefoot, her hair loose, eyes soft. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She stood beside him, like she had in so many dreams he never admitted to having. They didn't embrace, didn't kiss. Not yet. They just looked at each other. In that look were 30 years of what-ifs, apologies, and unsaid truths. No ceremony, no camera crew, no production, just Keanu and Sandy, two souls that had somehow waited without meaning to for a moment like this. "I think I was always afraid," he whispered, looking down at his hands. "Afraid that if you knew how much you meant to me, I'd lose you." Sandra touched his fingers, one at a time. "Maybe you were never meant to chase me," she said. "Maybe you were just meant to stop running." That was all it took. The next breath they shared felt different, lighter, realer, and without a script, just life. They sat together on the porch steps, letting the silence stretch not as an absence, but as a comfort. The kind of silence that comes only when there's nothing left to prove. Sandra leaned her head on his shoulder, just slightly. Keanu didn't move, didn't speak. He just breathed in the moment like it might be the last time the world was ever this still. "I used to think love had to be loud," Keanu murmured after a long pause. "That it needed declarations and fireworks. But maybe the deepest kind of love is the one that doesn't ask to be seen. It just stays." Sandra smiled without lifting her head. "It was always here," she said softly, "even when you weren't." He turned and looked at her then, really looked. The same eyes that had once met his across a table read, nervous and unsure, were now calm, steady. They weren't young anymore, but something in them felt new. Like this wasn't a second chance, it was the first real one. "I never told you about the house," Keanu said. "I kept it all these years. I didn't know why. Maybe part of me hoped you'd find your way here someday." She looked up at him, her expression both surprised and unsurprised. "I always knew you were saving something." They stood again, walking the short stone path that led to the back garden. There, just past the last row of roses, stood an old oak tree. Beneath it, a swing creaked gently. Keanu reached out and gave it a small push. "I built this the year after Speed," he said. Well, I didn't know for what. I just needed to make something that didn't move so fast." Sandra let out a soft laugh, the kind that trembled slightly, edged with emotion. "We were always running," she said. "From success, from loneliness, from each other." Keanu turned toward her. "I'm tired of running." She stepped closer, then stopped. No fanfare, no applause, just two people choosing each other in the quiet. They sat beneath the tree, legs stretched out on the grass. Time passed differently there. It wasn't measured in minutes, but in the weight that lifted, the air that softened. Keanu spoke again, his voice low. "If I've learned anything from this life, it's that some people aren't meant to pass through. They're meant to stay. And if you're lucky, you get one more chance to see them." Sandra looked at him, not with tears this time, but with peace. "Some loves don't end," she said. He nodded. They wait. The camera would never catch what happened next. There was no headline, no social media post, just a moment shared between them when they both knew they were no longer living in almosts. They were here, together, finally. As the sun dipped lower, the light stretched long across the garden. They stood once more, and without a word, walked toward the house. No declarations, no fireworks, just presence, just love. And as they reached the door, Keanu paused and turned back to the viewer, the invisible audience who'd followed this quiet story to its close. "If you're listening," he said gently, "and there's someone you've loved in silence, someone you've waited for, maybe it's time. A beat. Tell him." Then he smiled softly, turned, and walked inside, hand in hand with Sandra. Fade out. Reflective CTA. Have you ever loved someone for decades and never told them? Have you ever carried a what if for so long it became part of you? Now's the time. Share your incredible story in the comments below of love, of waiting, of second chances. We want to hear it. And if this story touched you, type "I still believe" in the comments. See you in the next incredible story.